Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to show you the Scotch repertoire I've created recently. So this is for those of you who play E4 and don't want to play the Italian or the Spanish or the Vienna against E5. The Scotch is a very imbalanced opening. It's very sharp as opposed to closed Spanish or closed Italian positions, and it promises very interesting games. Now, this repertoire was based on what Garry Kasparov played in the 90s. So there are newer, more modern lines employed by today's grandmasters, albeit very, very rarely, because the Scotch is played very rarely. So this is something that Kasparov played himself, and I've based the repertoire on that. The easiest way to learn an opening is to practice it. So instead of going over theoretical lines, you actually get experience in it. If you don't have a human you can play against Nocti. That's what I use because I don't know any crazy people who are willing to train against me all the time. Follow the link in the description. You will get exactly to the Scotch repertoire, and then you can play it out against Nocti. Select Nocti's difficulty, select the side you wish to play. Here you can select any other repertoire. You have a Nocti and you start playing. The great thing is that Nocti is going to be giving you immediate feedback. So if you make a mistake, okay, knight takes d4. Why? Okay, Nocti plays this strange line. You're going to see it in the repertoire. We play queen c4 to avoid a trade. Okay, now we get a very, very nice Scotch structure without the queens on the board. This is basically going to be an exchange Spanish or a Berlin, where the queens are off the board, so no compensation for black. Let's end this now. There are other things you can do on Nocti. I'll just mention my favorite feature. There are flashcards which are great. You can connect your Lichess games or chess.com games and then get actual flashcards from your games. But themes are what I like most and what I use most. So when I prepare for a game, I'm going to import positions in my prep that I'm uncomfortable with, and I'll create themes on Nocti and then play them out. So Nocti is a great way to practice anything if you don't have a sparring partner. Follow the link in the description. If you decide to go premium on Nocti, use the code Hanging Pawns for a massive 64% discount. The Scotch repertoire is also available on my Patreon page. Follow the link in the description and you will get the PGN file with all the variations I've shown in the video. You can purchase it separately for $4 US, or you can gain access to all the repertoires you can see here, including one E4, one D4, the Nimzo, the Queen's Gambit Decline, the King's Indian, the Caro-Kann, the French, the Vienna. There are many, many repertoires. If you become a member, if you want to support the channel for just $4 US a month, you will gain access to all of these and around 500 other posts. So if you want to do that, follow the link below. Now let's go back to the Scotch repertoire. We are going to go over 4 main variations. The first one is knight f6, which is going to lead to the 4 knights Scotch once we play knight c3. There are alternatives for white on each move, but this is a recommended repertoire for white, so it's not a theoretical overview. For that, you can watch my series on the Scotch where I've covered everything. So we're looking at knight f6 as the main line. We're looking at bishop c5, the classical Scotch, as the second most popular. Then we're going to have a look at bishop b4, which is the Malaniuk variation. And finally, we're going to have a look at the sidelines, such as queen h4, queen f6, what happens if black trades on d4, and so on. We're going to cover everything. And after this, you're going to be prepared to play the Scotch as white. Before we go into the theory, I need to show you something very important that's going to help you when playing the Scotch. We have 4 very important structures. And the most important one I would like to begin with is this structure here. This is what you get from the Mises variation, where white trades on c6, which isn't something we're going to do immediately. We will be playing knight c3 against knight f6, but we are still going to be getting this structure. So this is the most important one. What does it mean for both sides? Well, firstly, for the moment, white has a deficit in the center, let's call it that, because black is going to play d5. Once black plays d5, we will rarely have an alternative to taking, which will bring us to our next structure, this one, where we have traded the e pawn for the doubled c pawn. Okay, so going from this structure to this one, there's a one move difference. d5, we have to take, we get this. So this here can be played different ways by black as well. Black can play with d6, which is usually considered not as challenging. Black can develop the rook to b8. Black can develop the rook to e8. Black can develop the rook to d8. There are many options, but d5 is the critical approach. And as soon as they play d5 and we take, we get this. And this is what you will normally play in the Scotch, this structure. And you could say that these two pawns are weak, but in practice, it's going to be very, very difficult to target them. So most middle games with this structure are going to be roughly equal. That being said, white can play b3, stop any pressure down the b file, and white is still going to have a slight structural edge. Now, the other two structures that are very important are this one, which is the typical Scotch structure, where we get this as soon as the Scotch is played. So we play d4, black plays e d4, we play knight d4, we have this structure. We have traded our d2 pawn for black's e7 pawn. This structure is going to turn into either what we saw previously, so this structure, if we trade on c6 and black plays bc6, or this one, if after knight c6, black plays dc6. This we aren't going to be getting as much in the repertoire. But what I would like to say about this structure is, if you get it, you should treat it the same way you treat an exchange Spanish or a Berlin. It's going to be dynamically superior for black, but better in the long run for white due to white's ability to create a passed pawn on the e file. So technically, every king and pawn endgame is winning for white. If you use that as a starting point, then it makes sense to trade pieces off. In the beginning, black's going to have massive initiative because of two wide open bishops and a lot more space, but long term, white's going to be better. Okay, now let's get into the Scotch. So after e4, e5, white plays knight f3, black plays knight c6, and here, as you probably know, the Spanish is bishop b5, the Italian is bishop c4, the Vienna is knight c3. There are other openings like the Ponziani, but today we're looking at d4. And d4 is today an unpopular opening, and it used to be quite unpopular in the 80s, until Garry Kasparov started playing it in his World Championship matches. And he sort of brought new life to the Scotch by introducing not new lines necessarily. Many of the lines that Kasparov employed were played in the 19th century, but he found new ideas within those lines. Okay, now black only has one move here. Any alternatives to e takes d4 are suspicious, to say the least. Knight takes d4 really isn't challenging. You can take on d4, you can take on e5, it doesn't really matter. Personally, I think knight takes d4 is better. And now we're going to reach a position where, in order for black to be close to equal, black has to play queen f6, and we're going to decline that trade with queen c4. So after the Scotch is played, black really only has one move, and that's e takes d4. White has a couple of options, but we are only looking at knight takes d4. The alternatives, bishop c4 and c3, are all covered in my Scotch playlist, but today I'm going to recommend the repertoire, therefore we're looking at the best move, knight takes d4. This is the beginning of the Scotch. And as I said, we're going to be looking at knight f6, bishop c5, bishop b4, and we're also going to have a look at queen f6, queen h4, and briefly g6. Let us begin with knight f6. This is the so-called Schmidt variation, but we are going to call it 4 knights because we're going to play knight c3. The main alternative is knight takes c6, but we aren't doing that. So knight c3. Okay. Black can now do a couple of things. But if you look at the databases, bishop b4 is the move that's played 95% of the time, and it is the best move because it puts immediate pressure on the e4 pawn. The alternative is bishop c5, which is I don't think is good. We can respond to with knight c6, bc6, and bishop d3, simply defending the pawn, and there's no pressure on c3, or knight takes e4, which again isn't really challenging, are very rare. But we're going to have a look at knight e4 just for a second, because it's an interesting piece sacrifice. So after knight c3, if they do play knight takes e4, we're going to take. And their idea is queen e7 followed by d5, winning back the knight. So we have to defend the knight. f3, black needs to play d5. If they don't play d5 now, we go queen e2 and we're up a piece. So d5, and now bishop b5, threatening to take on c6. They have to defend before they take on e4. And now we exchange on c6, bc6, and we castle. And we get a position where black's structure is so messy. They basically have to castle queenside here, that I honestly don't think anyone in their right mind should play this with black. The engine says plus 0.3, so only a slight edge for white. But I mean, look at white's potential. Look at how unsafe black's king is, and look at white's pawn structure. Most importantly, look at these open lines towards the king. The rook could swing over, and even the knight might come to a5. So even though the engine says this is equal, don't do this as black. And if you have white, just don't be worried about this piece sacrifice. So we're focusing on bishop b4. Okay, now after bishop b4, the idea for black is to simply win the e4 pawn, so we must do something now. So we take on c6. Taking with the d pawn is not good because we get to trade queens and black's king is misplaced. So takes with the b pawn, and now we have to defend the e4 pawn, so bishop d3. And notice that we have now reached the structure I was originally showing you, where black needs to play d5 in order to undouble the pawns and strengthen their influence in the center. Also, d5 would threaten d4. So d5 is the main move. As I said, the alternative d6 really isn't, it's nothing major. And if black castles now, they are still going to go d5 a bit later on. Although there is one sideline I would like to show you. We're going to go back to d5. But if black castles and we castle, again, they should go d5. But if they go rook e8, that's a sideline, we can now cause trouble for them with bishop g5. And I think this line is favorable for white. Again, the engine always says close to equal, but this pin has to be broken. If it isn't broken, if black just makes a random move like rook b8, then we are going f4 and e5, and black is getting destroyed. So h6, bishop h4, and now again d5 is a possibility, but if they break the pin with g5, we're going to go bishop g3 and sacrifice a pawn. Notice that the e pawn is hanging, so bishop g5 may seem like a strange move, but we're actually very happy to offer this trade, bishop takes c3, bc3, knight e4, because we have the move queen h5. And this is very, very tough to defend for black. Now, if they play the most natural move, queen f6, then we go rook e1, we're going to go f3, and we're going to break down the center. For example, d5, f3, knight d6, the rook needs to be defended, rook e8, knight e8, f4. Look at this. This is a massive initiative. We have technically sacrificed a pawn, but that really doesn't matter as much. Now, after queen h5, they can also completely ignore us and play d6, against which we shouldn't take on h6. That's, I mean, it's a fine move, but there's bishop f5. I think it would be better to simply go rook e1 and increase the pressure down the center. This pawn is never going away. If black plays queen f6 now, the knight's hanging. So rook e1 is simply a tempo move. So in short, on bishop d3, if they castle and go rook e8, we can castle and go bishop g5, and don't be afraid to sacrifice this pawn, because when they play h6, g5, we have this queen infiltration, and their king is too unsafe. So, d5, the main move. Now, of course, this threatens d4, so it also threatens to take on e4, so we can lose material two different ways. So we have to take it. E takes d5, c takes d5. Now black has alternatives to c takes d5. One of them is castles, which is going to transpose. Another possibility is to go bishop g4 at some point, provoking f3, but that's not too scary. And another possibility is queen e7, which we can simply parry with queen e2. That's sort of a draw invitation, I would say. But it's really not a big deal. The main move is cd5 by far. And both sides castle. And now we reach basically the beginning of the four knights Scotch. You could call all the previous moves, well, not forced, but they are the main line by such a wide margin that it's very likely you'll be reaching move 10 without even thinking, and that you're going to get this position every time. This is the first point at which white really has a choice. Bishop g5 is one move, h3 is another. I prefer the move h3. Now, what h3 does is it prevents bishop g4 and knight g4 in every line. And you may notice that it's very difficult for black to develop this bishop. So the bishop after h3 is usually going to go to b7. Okay, now black has a couple of options. Rook b8, rook e8, or simply playing c6. The idea for white, and this is something we are going to be playing for in all the lines, is queen f3 followed by bishop f4. This is our safe setup. Because once we challenge this diagonal, this bishop is never going to be safe on d6. We can simply trade it off. I should mention that black never takes on c3. That would make very little sense because our bishop would then be unopposed. And another idea behind queen f3 and bishop f4 is to prevent rook b8 and to put pressure on c7. So black normally starts with c6, queen f3, and now bishop d6 I think is the best move, although there are other moves. Whatever black plays here, whether it's rook b8, rook e8, or bishop d6, we do the same thing. We play bishop f4. So bishop d6, bishop f4, they do something, let's say rook b8, b3. This is what I was talking about when I was showing you this structure. This is the main type of middle game position we're going to get. So black has a couple of ideas here. The main one is rook b4. Black can also play queen c7, threatening to take on f4. I think queen c7 is a waste of tempo because we're going to take on d6 anyway. Black can also play bishop e6 or rook b7, trying to double down the e file. Their main idea, though, is rook to b4. And now the bishop is under pressure, so we can choose between knight e2 and bishop d6. I prefer bishop d6. And after queen d6, we simply continue developing rook fe1, bishop e6, let's say. And now rook ad1, followed by knight e2, knight g3, and occupying the f5 square. So you will notice straight away that neither side really has an advantage, and that's almost always the case with the Scotch. It's not the most precise opening, so the engine is always going to frown on white's ideas, and white isn't going to have a major edge, as is the case in the Benoni or in the, I don't know, the King's Indian, or in some lines of the closed Spanish. But we do have this very, very pleasant edge in the form of our structure. And of course, if black manages to get rid of these pawns, which the engine thinks is very probable, then black's going to be completely equal. If we turn on the engine, it says plus 0.3 for white. Okay, so that's the four knights Scotch. Now we're going to have a look at the classical, which is bishop c5. Now, there are different ideas here. Knight b3, knight takes c6, or bishop e3. Basically, the knight must be either defended or it must move. What we're going to do is knight takes c6, which is also called the Kasparov variation. Now, if bc6, then we've nothing to worry about. And it's going to be a mix between the queen h4 Scotch and what we just saw if black plays knight f6. So if bc, then we go bishop d3, they go queen h4, and we must defend f2, and the bishop has to keep defending e4. So queen e2, fine. knight f6, h3, again we want to prevent knight g4, bishop g4 and all that stuff, d5, g3, queen h5, queen takes, knight takes, something like knight c3, and now we have this great structure for basically no dynamic compensation for black because the queens have been traded off. So I think this is slightly more favorable for white compared to the 4 knights. The engine again says it's equal after something like castles and g4. So on knight c6, black normally doesn't do that. Black doesn't play bc6. There is a line here that starts with queen f6, and this is the main line. This is called the intermezzo variation or the Kasparov variation or the classical variation. Call it whatever you want. Black does 2 things with this move, threatens mate on f2 and perhaps introduces the possibility of taking the knight back with the queen. So we have to defend mate. There are 2 ways to do that, queen f3 and queen d2. We don't really want to play f3. That would be a complete disaster. We're going to play the way Kasparov played this, queen d2. I know that we're blocking all of our pieces, but it's going to make sense in a bit. Okay, so we've defended mate. The knight needs to be recaptured. It's possible for black to take back with the queen, but if they play queen takes, then we go bishop d3, and the queen has moved twice. I'm not really sure that black has anything here. We should say that the pawn is immune due to rook e1. So black castles. And now we need to play dynamically because the pawn is under pressure. So b4, the bishop moves. c3, the bishop moves again. And now c4, threatening to trap the bishop. So once again, the bishop comes to d4, and now we finally play knight c3, defending our pawn. If black should take here on c3 and you know, threaten to win our pawn, after knight e4, we have the move queen d4, double attacking the knight. The knight must move back, and now bishop g5, and you can see that white has built this tremendous initiative with the bishop pair. White has not a lead in development, but 2 bishops cutting across the board, and the engine says h6 or queen d6 or d5 are black's options. If h6 is played, I think we can always throw in b5. b5, queen d6, takes, 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 takes. This just looks massive for white. It's +1, but I think from a human perspective, it's even more than that. So after queen d2, once we defend mate, black is normally going to recapture with the d-pawn, although taking with the b-pawn is also possible, but it makes very little sense here. Since we aren't threatening queen takes d8, dc makes more sense because you open up the bishop. So dc. Okay, we continue developing, knight c3, normal, bishop e6, again, a normal move. And now we're going to play a move that Garry Kasparov played a couple of times, and I think this is why it's called the Kasparov variation, the move knight a4. Now, bishop e6 isn't the only option, but I think it's the best option. One alternative is knight e7, which was played in Kasparov Topalov in 1996, and this was often played in the 90s. Against this, we're once again going to play the move knight a4, and Kasparov in this position normally didn't play knight a4. He played queen f4, which is slightly less aggressive, but we're going to go knight a4. And after knight a4, this bishop must move away. If it goes to d4, we go c3. Then on bishop e5, we go knight c5, again making it harder to develop the bishop on c8. And after knight a4, if the bishop goes to d6, we are going to go f4. This isn't the most precise according to the engine. Black is supposed to be equal, but we are using the fact that black's king is in the center and we have these 2 pawns marching up the board. The only way for black to stay equal is to play b5. And now, of course, the knight heads back. The bishop must move away to make sure we don't fork the 2 pieces. And we can play bishop d3. Castles, queen e2. And after something like queen h4 check, g3, queen h3, it's clear that we're never castling, but we can play bishop e3. That's why we played queen e2. We can recapture there and castle queenside. So even though the engine says minus 0.1, there is only one move that keeps this position equal for black. I mean, that's bishop g4. And after bishop g4, queen f2. Any other move, white has a significant advantage. So that's knight e7. But if black plays the main move, which is bishop e6, I've also covered bishop d4 as an alternative in the repertoire, but bishop e6 is the main move. And now we go knight a4 again. And this position, I think, is very interesting. It's very thematic. I would recommend that you look at Garry Kasparov's games. This is what he did. Kasparov short, Kasparov Yusupov from 1994, Kasparov short from 1993. There are a couple of games. There's a great game, Ivanchuk versus Amonatov, played in 2007. What else? There's a great game played between John Nunn and Glenn Fleer. So this became really popular in the 90s. And the idea is, of course, I just want to grab your bishop. So most people are going to go rook d8, of course, gaining a tempo on the queen. If the bishop heads back to d6, we go queen e3. Again, this may seem like a strange move, but it's preventing castling. The knight is tough to develop. So if knight h6, for example, h3 preventing knight g4, black castles, we go bishop d2. Pawn is defended by the knight. Let's say rook f8, castles queenside. Okay, so this is the idea. We want an aggressive setup. We have chased the bishop away, and black normally shouldn't play like this. So on knight a4, black should throw in rook d8. Okay, bishop d3, defending the queen, and now the bishop must move away. Okay, there is bishop d6, but that would block the rook, so bishop d4. Which makes more sense. Also, bishop d6 goes away. Whoa. Excuse me. Also, bishop d6 would move away from f2. Okay, so bishop d4, we can safely castle. Don't play c3, although it's playable because it undefends your bishop, ties down your queen. So castles. And now black has a6, b5, knight e7. There are many moves. Knight e7, I think, is the most principled move. At this point, I like one single plan, and that's to go king h1 followed by f4. Maybe not immediately. Maybe you can prepare that with, queen e2 unpinning, maybe knight c3 bringing the knight back, but the essential idea is f4. And eventually, let's say b5 is played. It could have been played earlier, but I'm trying to show you the ideas. This bishop is going to be under threat. So let's say rook f8, queen e2 or queen e1, and we're threatening to march these pawns up the board. Again, not straight away, and perhaps we want to get rid of this bishop first. But these two pawns are white's assets, and we're playing for this pawn majority on the king side / center, and we're playing against this weakened pawn majority black has on the queen side. Remember that trades are usually favorable for us. Disregard the fact that we are sacrificing this pawn. That's pretty meaningless. You don't have to play queen e2. You can also go queen e1. If you want to make sure that you don't lose the pawn, go queen e1. But I'd be pretty happy if black ever took here, especially if they took twice, because now we play bishop d2 and look at our bishops opening up. Something like queen d4, bishop e3, and everything is under fire. We can also just recapture here if we want to. So in the classical Scotch, our plan is very simple. We take on c6, they play queen f6, we defend mate. They recapture the knight, we go knight c3. They develop the bishop or do something else, and we go knight a4. What we want to do is we want to chase the bishop away from the best possible diagonal and the pressure on f2. Black should ignore that, go rook d8, bishop d3, bishop d4, and now castles. And our idea is king h1, f4. That's our idea. And long term, we're of course playing for e5. We want to create this passed pawn on the e file. Okay, let's move on to the Malaniuk variation. So bishop e4 check, even though it's the third most popular move and it's been played by, Carlsen, Aronian, Nakamura, and many, many others, I think it's way less challenging than, than the two main lines. I'll explain why. So we have to play c3. Okay, they move the bishop back. And now again, we have the option between defending the knight or taking. We don't have to do anything. We can also go bishop c4 because the pawn's now on c3. But what I like is the move bishop e3. And there are many games, for example, MVL versus Kramnik, where Kramnik won in 2013 with black here. But there are also many games in which white does pretty well. Now the idea is, of course, that we want to take the knight and the bishop's hanging. Also the queen is hanging. So when knight takes c6, white just wins a piece. So black loses a tempo with bishop b6. And our idea is going to be to create a Marozzi bind structure with c4, e4, and the knight on e3. That may seem far away now, but after knight f5, we're threatening to take on g7. So black takes on e3 just to misplace the knight. We recapture with the knight, knight f6, f3. This is the structure. And once black castles, we go c4. Why are we playing c4? We want to prevent d5. And if we can get this Scotch structure without d5, that's usually very favorable for white. So d6, knight c3, for example. Well, black needs to do something, so probably f5. So knight d7, queen d2, knight c5, bishop e2, f5, sure, e takes f5, bishop takes f5, knight takes, rook takes, and castles. I think this is splendid for white. There are alternatives in which black can play for a quick d5, but not that many. So after bishop e3, bishop b6, knight f5, black can also play g6. And now we exchange on b6, a takes b6, whoa, knight e3, knight f6, f3 again, castles. And now against c4, the black king is already very safe, so they can try sacrificing a pawn with d5 since our king is still on e1. And I think this might be the sharpest way to play. The idea is, of course, queen h4 check, and this line we have to examine very carefully. If they don't play d5 now, we are going to have enough time to develop, let's say, bishop e2. At least we're not vulnerable to frontal checks from the e8 square. But now we have to take. Okay, so we take, and black's idea is knight takes e4. Again, we have to take, and queen h4 check. Very, very standard, piece sacrifice. Fortunately for white, in this case, it's simply bad. Queen takes e4, and we have the saving move, bishop d3. Of course, we don't take the knight. We would get destroyed and lose the queen and more. So the queen is attacked, queen d4, the b2 pawn is attacked. Do not take the knight. It's okay to take the knight, it's equal, but we have a much stronger move, queen b3. And after queen b3, black is simply down a piece. Usually black plays rook e8, attacking the knight, and we go rook e1, defending the knight, and that's it. That's the end of counterplay. That's it. It's more than +1 for white. Black needs to save the knight on c6, so knight e5, knight a3, I don't know, maybe bishop d7, rook ac2, and that's it. The queen must move. There is no pressure. There's just no pressure. So this piece sacrifice isn't scary, and most people in the Malaniuk after bishop b4 are going to follow the script, and on knight f5 they're going to take on e3, play knight f6 and castle, and just not have d5. So after c4, d5 is unplayable. With the knight on f6, the same pattern is sort of playable, but it works even worse here. So if you go knight e4, fe4, queen h4, king d2, there's a pawn on e4 now, so queen takes e4, bishop d3. If, let's say, queen b4 check, then we can play knight c3, and if queen takes b2, that's the end of the game. Knight c2 defends the knight, and the knight's hanging. This is +5 for white. So I really don't think the Malaniuk is scary. Now finally, we're going to go over the rare lines. We're going to start with queen f6. I don't think queen f6 has a name, but it has a very direct idea, playing bishop c5 and checkmate on f2. In many ways, this is similar to bishop c5 to begin with. What we're going to do against this is simply play the most aggressive move, which is knight b5. And knight b5 threatens knight c7 check. So bishop c5 threatens mate, we have to defend, queen e2. Bishop b6 has to defend c7, and now we go knight c3. And knight c3 threatens knight d5. So what do you do? What do you do as black? Knight g7, let's say, bishop e3. You cannot take this bishop. Black must play the move bishop a5 here. Let me show you. If black does nothing, if black castles, we go bishop b6, a b6, knight c7, winning. Simple. If black takes on e3, we take with the queen. You cannot defend c7. You could technically play king d8, but that's just awful. It's +2. If you don't play king d8, I'll just take on c7. So on bishop e3, black plays the move bishop a5. Okay, and we castle queenside. Okay, a6, knight d4, bishop c3, bc3. We have the bishop pair. Fine, we have double c-pawns, but that's not a big deal. This position is slightly better for white. After black castles, we're going to go queen d2. Black is going to go d5. We can exchange on c6, and it's a perfectly playable position. So queen f6, not a problem. Queen h4 is perhaps more popular today. This is the Steinitz variation. Very similar idea to queen f6 and the classical with bishop c5 in a sense, because it puts pressure on f2, but queen h4 also puts pressure on e4. So it's a bit more concrete. So knight c3 defending the pawn, bishop b4 attacking the pawn. Okay, we need to do something. And we don't have bishop d3 simply because our knight hangs on d4, so we need to do something else. It's possible to play knight b5, but I don't like that move. I like bishop e2, simply sacrificing a full pawn. Now, after queen takes e4, which is the best move, we don't care about g2. We go knight b5. And on knight b5, since the knight was attacked, we have now saved all of our pieces. If queen takes g2 is played, white is winning with bishop f3. The queen must move, so let's say queen h3. And now we can continue with knight c7 check and just win the game. So not queen g2. What else? If king d8 defending, then we simply castle. And black's king is misplaced. Black has taken a pawn, but at what cost? So on knight b5, most people will take on c3. We, of course, don't take with the knight. We take with the pawn to keep threatening this. And now they have to play king d8. They have to play king d8. And we can simply castle. Okay. After castles, black should continue developing. So let's say knight f6. We can now go bishop g5. We can go knight d4. We can go rook b1. There are many moves. I like the move bishop g5. I think black should defend this. If they don't, I mean, queen f5 is a multi-purpose move, which I really like because it gets away from rook e1. So let's say queen f5. It also defends the knight. And now we need to do something drastic. It's unlikely that black's king is ever going to be safe. So what I like to do here is I like to play h4 because the bishop needs defending and we don't have a more comfortable way to defend. And especially since after d6 we are first to claim the e file. And black needs to go rook e8 now. Once we move the bishop, we're going to be controlling the e file again. So if you play this way against the Steinitz, if you simply sacrifice the pawn, I think, and go knight b5, this is just great. This is the only line that the engine really, really likes for white. Okay, finally, let's have a look at a very weird line. Firstly, let's briefly cover knight takes d4. This is just no good. Queen f6 is the continuation, and now we simply move the queen away to c4. This is a very rare line, but I like it because it declines the trade and puts pressure on c7. If queen c6 is played, we simply trade, and we get this favorable pawn structure without the queens on the board. And the final move I want to have a look at against the Scotch is g6, which again isn't a great move. Knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3 defends the knight, and the knight f6, we just take c6, and we go e5. Now, the knight shouldn't go to d5. The knight going to d5 is actually a huge mistake because it gives up a pawn. So the knight should go to g8. And looking at this position, you can see that the opening hasn't been a success for black, which is why g6 is definitely a suboptimal move. I would advise you to look at the game between the Croatian GM Palac Mladen versus Janez Barle, played in 1999, very clean conversion. So this is the Scotch repertoire. Again, it's available below. Let me know what you think. If you're an e4 player, I hope this was helpful. And yeah, stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.